need to know is how old everybody is and how much you pay them. So again, you can do that yourself, and there's a manual way of doing this, so there's certainly a possibility of doing it as a DIY. Second thing, and actually interesting that we came to it a little bit earlier on, and this is about employee engagement and being a good employer. And I think auto-enrolment is actually a big part of this, is getting employees engaged with pensions, with their own retirement planning. The whole auto-enrolment piece has been designed because actually in the UK we've got a bit of a problem. You probably all know that we actually seem to be living longer. So we've got a lot more people of retirement age than we ever have done, and that's not likely to change. Now, what that does is that puts a big strain on benefits, such as the state pension. For some of you, you may have already found that your state pension has been moved back and back again, and probably by the time I come to it, it'll be 80, 100 by the time I can get it. And what you do get is pretty minimal. I think last year we're looking at about £113 a week or something to that effect, just the basic state pension. So call it £450 a month. Can't have particularly good time on that, I don't suppose. That's designed to do one thing though, pay the bills. So if you want any kind of retirement, you need to have some form of private provision. And until now, we've had a lot of employers with, final salary schemes. Oh, I wish I had one of those. Final salary schemes, absolutely gold-plated arrangements. If you can get one of those, fantastic. Tell me where I can go and get it as well, because they are amazing. But for the bulk majority of us, it'll be some form of a money purchase arrangement. So this is where we're putting money into a pension, waiting until the end. We've got a hopefully, great big pot of money that we can then do something with. But not everybody sees that. A lot of guys, I go into some businesses, hundreds and hundreds of employees, and it's always the young guys that I'm sitting there talking to, and you're saying about pensions, and you're saying about how much the contributions will work out to be on a monthly basis, and it's minimal, but they'd still rather spend it down the pub. So employee engagement and really communicating the importance of retirement planning, I think, is a big part of auto-enrolment. I mentioned a staging date. Your staging date doesn't just happen once. Every 3 years we have what is referred to as a re-enrollment. So although you're continually assessing your staff and you're moving in between categories, etc., you only need to communicate with anybody when they change. Every 3 years, third year anniversary from your staging date, you've got to go through the full process again, as it were. So you need to look at your employees, even if somebody's previously opted out because they were in their 20s and would rather spend money on beer and young ladies. Every 3 years, you need to say, are you sure you don't want to be in a pension? You need to put them back in, and again, they have to opt themselves out if they choose not to be a member of that pension. The idea here is, of course, eventually they'll give in and say, you know what, it's easier just to stay in it. Hopefully, that's the idea here, but it's all about engagement. Communications, there is such thing as a statutory communication, and as I've said, that's for every single level. So an entitled worker, an eligible employee, a non-eligible employee, it doesn't matter who they are, you need to communicate with them. So that is either communication to say, guess what, you're in the pension, you can come out if you want, and this is how you do it. You're not in the pension, but you can be if you want to, and we'll make contributions, or here's a pension, it's available to you if you want to join it. Again, this is an entitled worker. So statutory communication will tell them the bare bones. Be careful. Yep.
I wonder, I'm just thinking, in terms of communication, because now people might start to be hearing about auto-enrolment, and just wondering, possibly people's personal assistants might come along and say, oh, you're my employer, what about my pension?
Yes.
If they say that, do people then have to do something about it?
Not there and then. I mean, it's from their staging date onwards that they need to start dealing with this. Interesting point, though, that I thought you were going to raise for a second there is, what can the employer say to employees? Because a big part of what I do is giving financial advice, and it's very heavily regulated. The amount of paperwork I have to do anything, just to leave the office, it's about 10 pages or so just to leave the office. Yeah, because we're regulated, and because the advice that you're giving an individual can affect their long-term finances. Same with a pension. I've just said it's a very important thing here that we're trying to build up a big pot of money so that individual at some stage can give up their work and be able to fund the rest of their life. So if you inadvertently, as an employer, because your employee naturally has come to you and said, oh, I've got this letter, it says about pensions here, what does this mean, and what does that mean, and should I be in it, which is the classic question, you just certainly shouldn't really give any information to your employees about it. It's knowing where to direct them, so this is where communications are very important. The point I was going to make there is that statutory communications, where you're telling your employees what's happened or what options they have, I would suggest is just the bare minimum, and that as a good employer, you go above and beyond that. So what we tend to do as Enrol.me, and part of the support that I normally offer, is to provide a three-stage communication process, or certainly suggest a three-stage communication process, because employees naturally will have issues when you start playing about with their money, and naturally will get pensions documents through the post and file it for later, because I know I do. It's, pensions, I'll leave that. So if you send them one statutory communication at their staging date, at your staging date, so let's say you assess them in, where are we now? We're in May. So your staging date is June. In June, you look at their pay, you've determined that they're an eligible employee, you've sent them a communication, one letter saying, guess what, we're putting you in the pension. They get something about pensions and put it to one side. What happens then is they've been put in the pension, you've taken contributions from them because they're an eligible employee, you've then sent those contributions across to the pension provider, and that 30-day cooling off period, that opt-out period, has started. Now that piece of paper is sitting on the desk, and let's be honest, 30 days can come and go very, very quickly. You've probably taken, and again, I'll talk about the minimum contributions in just a sec, but let's say you've taken as little as £10, £15 from your employee. If that 30 days comes and goes, that employee can no longer touch that £10, £15, whatever it may be, for X amount of years. Let's say they're 25. They can't touch it for another 30 years. They're not going to be, A, very happy about that, and B, really, what is £15 going to do for over 30 years? I mean, I give advice on investments, but £15, I've got to go some way to turn that into a decent retirement. So 30 days, you've got 30 days to opt out. If an employee doesn't realise that auto-enrolment is coming and they get one letter from you, chances are they won't do much about it. We tend to work on the principle that you really need to hit this home. And number one, we'll send a communication saying in a couple of months' time, we are going to do this, whatever this may be, so we're going to automatically enroll you into the X pension. I'll come on to the different providers in a sec. Then a second letter saying, guess what, it's still coming, and you'll get a letter from us, and whenever you're going to be sending the letter. And then the final letter saying, guess what, it's arrived, this is what you can now do about it. Within those letters, what we tend to do as well is to put our personal contact details at Enrol.me, so your employees, rather than bringing those questions to you and leaving you in an awkward position where you might know the answer, but you don't legally want to give it, phone this number, speak to this guy here, have a chat with an advisor, and again, we can give that information to employees. So
that sounds a little bit tricky for people to do, because naturally maybe people want to kind of say to them, look, this is what it's about.
it is. It very.
Is it, from your point of view, really you've got to be careful about not giving financial advice?
Very careful. I mean, if you said something to an employee, how likely is it that the regulator will pick up on that? And let's be honest, if they were to pick up on it, would it be there, or would it be in 20, 30 years' time when that individual has got to retirement and they said, oh no, Dave said I shouldn't have a pension. And yeah, then that's a lot of unwinding to do, and I'm sure the legal backlash from that will be pretty impressive. But yeah, as an employee, what you don't want to be doing is, even if it's inadvertently, giving advice, because it could come back and bite you on the backside. As I say, financial services are very heavily regulated because we are talking about people's long-term financial planning. If you make a mistake with their wages in 1 month, can you correct it the next month? Yeah, of course you can. If you make a bit of a mess with somebody's pension, by the time we come to find it, they could be in a very sticky situation.
So Giles, might be the kind of key things, I'm just thinking for people, might be sort of key things they might need to say to an employer and how to do it, whether it's in writing rather than having lots of conversation about it.
Certainly.
But I guess people might still want to say something, have a conversation in some way.
Yeah, it is a difficult one. It's a difficult one. What we do for a lot of employers is to have what we would call like a one-to-one session. So we sit down and talk with employees. Of course, it depends on how many employees you have, the location, etc., etc. We've found so far that certainly just that telephone helpline, just be able to pick up and have a chat with somebody is the best way. But of course, as an employer, yes, you can tell your employees that it's coming. You can tell them how fantastic the pension is. It's just what we don't want you to do is inadvertently give advice. So we can certainly give guidance on what you can and can't say, but it is very, very restrictive just through, the financial services are very restrictive game to play. Also, you'll probably find that I've just said letter there a few times. When you speak to, if you were to try and do this yourself, and certainly you can go out and auto-enrolment, the whole piece can certainly be done as a project as you as the employer. You don't need a third party like an advisory firm or speaking to a payroll company or et cetera, et cetera. This is something that you can do yourself. However, if going to a pension provider, what you'll often find is they will sell you the fact that they can do the statutory communications. And what they mean when they say they can do the statutory communications is they will send an email for you. What they will send is an email to a verifiable workplace email address in most cases. So hopefully all of your employees have verifiable workplace email addresses, but probably that's not the case, I imagine. No, exactly. What that would mean is that you would end up having to send a letter from an email format, which is very, very poorly put together because it was meant as an email and not as a letter. What we tend to advise most of the people we speak to is to send a letter. These days, and maybe it's just me, but I'll go back to the office, I imagine, after this, and I'll have a stream of emails, 50, 60 emails, and most of the time it'll be delete, 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 and hardly even look at them. Emails really don't carry much weight these days. When you find a letter, has that prestige to it almost, that I've got a letter that's addressed to me, it's not junk mail. Oh, it's a pension. Brilliant. So people tend to take far more notice than if you just drop them an email. So be careful when looking at statutory communications and how you're going to issue it. Lots of places will tell you that they'll do it, and yes, they'll give you something which is compliant, because a statutory communication is legally required to say certain things within it, guidance of which you can find from the regulator's website, but just be careful that how you're communicating that out to your employees. We'd always suggest a letter in most cases. This legislation was introduced. The government basically incepted their own version of a master trust known as Nest. You might have heard of that, seen it if you've done any research on auto-enrolment. Nest is the provider, or I certainly call them, the provider of last resort. So if you're struggling to get a pension anywhere, you can always go to Nest. Nest was set up by the government as a pension provider that will accept, not can, but will accept every single employee.